I have a special surprise guest on the podcast today. We did not see this coming, but yesterday, or actually this morning, I got this email that said that my guest was going to be in town. I reached out and said, I'll pick up at the airport, but you got to be on the podcast. He said yes. So here is Rob Chrisman. Rob, thank you for joining me.
It's amazing what I will do to avoid paying Uber.
I know. You are a man of savings. So yeah, we saved you some money. All it cost you is some time. Thanks for coming out.
They say time is money. Money is time. Anyway,
It's
you're very
like
welcome. Glad to be here. And great offices, and a great building in Vancouver, which is surprisingly cool.
It's been on the rise lately. It's been really nice. And you get to see the waterfront tonight, which is going to be awesome.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, it just has a nice vibe.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yep. All right. So, Rob, where do we even start with this? First of all, let me just frame this. You and I have known each other for a while now. You went to Guatemala with me, which we can talk about if we get to that point. The funniest thing about that trip, by the way, is when you started just rattling off Spanish and none of us knew that you spoke Spanish. You didn't tell anybody. And then I'm like, who's speaking Spanish? And as you just totally fluent in Spanish. So that's like one of my funny memories from that trip. But before we get into that, let's start at the very beginning, because you've been in mortgage for how many years?
35-ish, no, 38, I don't know, 1985, between my first and second years at Cal in the MBA program. Mm-hmm. I went to work for a mortgage bank, and then they offered me a full-time job in 1986. So it's been decades.
Wow.
More than I care to think about. Now, though, interestingly enough, when I go to conferences, people are actually proud of the number of years that they have been in the business, mm-hmm. as opposed to trying to hide it. Mm-hmm. So they're like, well, I've been in the business 41 years, or I've been there 32 years, or whatever it might be. Whereas in the past, people were kind of like, oh, I've been here, a number of years, but mm-hmm. now it's a badge of honor.
Yeah. Well, because you've been through a lot in that amount of time.
I have. Lots of people have. It's been an interesting business and a
mm-hmm.
great business.
Did you grow up in California, or was Cal your entrance into California?
No, I grew up in California and majored in food science at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and went to work for Safeway in a milk plant in the supervisor training program. And then I sailed through that, and then went to work in an ice cream plant for Safeway in the management training program, and started sailing through that. And at that point, I realized this isn't really what I want to do. I really don't want to supervise Teamsters for the rest of my life and deal with that. And I found myself siding with the hourly employees more than management in many mm-hmm. things. And so I thought, that's probably not for me. And so I was talking to my mom, and I said, what am I going to do? And she goes, well, why don't you go back and get an MBA? And I said, what's an MBA? And she said, well, it's a Master's of Business Administration. She'd gone to Stanford.
Oh, and you went to Cal?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay, that's
don't
problem.
Don't rush me. So yeah, my grandfather went to Stanford, so like class of 1912 or something. Anyway, so she said, go back and get an MBA. And I said, all right. And so I applied to Cal. That was the only school I applied to. Wow. And I don't remember what exactly she said. I mean, she was a Stanford fan and went to football games for many, many years afterward, but it was a 2-year program. So yeah, that was, and I grew up in the Santa Clara Valley, basically, or Santa Barbara, and my dad was a foreman in a cannery at that point. And so I grew up working in a cannery and so on. So having that food manufacturing background really helped going to work for Safeway.
How long from when you graduated at SLO to when you went to Cal, how many years was there?
2.
So you did all of that in 2 years, all of the...
Yeah, I sailed, like I say, I sailed through, and I thought this was it. And then they offered me a regular job, or a big boy job at a milk plant in Denver. And I turned it down, and I thought, there's a reason why I turned this down. I need to figure it out. So...
And that's what led you to moving on back to
academia and getting an MBA.
Did your parents judge you for going to Cal?
Not at all. My dad graduated from high school and went right into the Navy in 1942. So he was just, he was fine. He was fine with it.
All right. Because rivalry's strong with those two.
It is. It's fine.
Okay.
It's all good.
So you go back to get your MBA. Was the intent that, that milk business or the ice cream business was where you would go back once you had your...
That's what I told the folks at Safeway.
Okay.
The milk plant manager, 𝗪𝗶𝗁, hey, Mr. 𝗂𝗁, could you write a letter of recommendation for me? And when I plan on getting an MBA, then coming back to Safeway and doing this, that, and the other thing, he said, sure. So there was some implied thinking that I would come back. But when you go to the MBA, when you get into the MBA program, you realize 90% of those people have no interest in going back to doing what they were doing. It is basically a great way to change careers.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're not learning food science, you're learning about accounting and marketing and finance and real estate and so on. So it was a great program for people, and I think still is. Any MBA program is a good program for people who want to make a change.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I have very few regrets in life, but one of them is not getting an MBA. Like I feel like
I thought you were going to say not going to high school.
No, I did. I barely made
did?
it through.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
MBA
good.
wasn't in my future, but yeah, looking back, just that general knowledge of running businesses and it's huge for people. So while you're there, did you get recruited into mortgage at that point?
Well, that's an interesting story. Glad you asked. As we neared our summer between first and second years, a lot of people in my domain, which is real estate finance or finance, depending on where you are, they were interviewing with investment banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Salomon Brothers, Smith Barney in New York. They wanted that summer job. It paid really well, but it looks great on a resume. And so I tried that, and I wasn't getting anywhere in terms of interviewing. And one day, I'll never forget it. I've told this story a lot of times. I'm down in the career center in the basement, and back when there were cork, message boards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at the bulletin board, and there was a little slip of paper that said California Mortgage Banking Internship Program. And I'm like, that's interesting. And it was in San Rafael, which was across the bay from Berkeley, so I could keep living where I was living.
Mm-hmm.
So I called the number, sent them a resume, got accepted into that First California Mortgage, and then went to work there. Then that was my summer job. And they liked the summer job, or they liked the work that I did, kept me on part-time my second year, which helped cover the rent. And that's how I got into mortgage banking. They offered me a job at the end of my second year. And at that point, they said, you can't really do what you're doing now, but would you like this job in secondary marketing? And I said, what's
Whoa.
that? And they said, well, you'll be working for this cool guy. And I said, sure. And sure enough, he was a cool guy, and I've been there ever since.
No way. So
I guess I can't ask you how you got into this at all, because this is a show about me.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was California. I was in Walnut Creek, and a buddy of mine was a title rep, and he's like, "You want a job?" And I had a communications degree, and with that you can bartender or wait tables, and or bag groceries. And he said, "You want a real job?" And I was like, "I'll take an interview." And I worked in Pleasanton for H&R Block Mortgage.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so same area, but I went into the loan officer side. You went straight into secondary. And
because I had that finance degree in finance and real estate from Cal, so it was kind of like, all right, well, he knows what a 30-second is, and he knows how to price a bond.
So you jumped in. What's the role for somebody like? Do you remember your first title coming out of college? Or your
college or out of Cal?
Out of Cal.
Out of Cal. It was like vice president of secondary marketing or something.
Brand new in the mortgage business.
Well, I don't know, junior assistant. Right. When I sign up for conferences now and they ask for a title, I always say like AVP.
Nice.
AVP at Chrisman LLC. I don't remember my title. I probably still have some of my business cards, but it wasn't. It was more just doing what I was doing, which was fascinating to me. I didn't really care about a title, and I never really cared about a title.
Were you single at the time?
Mm-hmm.
So you can go wherever and kind of do your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you get in. How big was the company?
You're going back a ways here.
Well, they had
Ken. I don't
secondaries.
know.
They had to be big enough to
Yeah,
be
sure.
selling
They were doing,
loans.
probably 30 or 50, 100 million a month, maybe kind of company. It was good. It was primarily builder based. So the company catered to builders and had union contracts and so forth. And so they would, and pension funds. So we would oftentimes have pension type loans for borrowers who were buying the builder's products. And then we would pull those loans up and then deliver them back to the pension funds.
So a bunch of that, you stayed there how many years?
I stayed there until, so this was 86, and I stayed there until 88. And interestingly enough, I went to a business dinner. So I never turned down a business dinner, free meal, right? And it was hosted by Morgan Stanley. And I liked the guys at Morgan Stanley because we were selling them securities, and they were in San Francisco, 𝗪𝗄𝗃, Paul Yost. And so I went to their dinner, and there were like 8 or 10 of us or whatever, and I was at one end, and this guy next to me was asking me all kinds of questions like, where are you from, and what are you doing now, and so forth. And his name was Paul Tuttle. And so Paul Tuttle was asking me these questions. So then a few days later, the guys at Morgan Stanley said, hey, Paul Tuttle runs this pipeline hedging company in Mill Valley, and he wants to see if you want to come in for an interview, see the operation. And I said, sure. I mean, I have nothing to lose. And I remember walking into the Tuttle and Company, which was basically the first pipeline hedging company. Now, of course, we've got MCT and Compass and Optimal Blue and all these others, but at that point it was just Tuttle and Company. And I remember walking in, and there were 6 people there: Paul, a guy named Art Yen, a couple administrative people, a couple IT people, and me. You walk right into the office. There's no waiting room or anything. And so sat down and interviewed, and it was in a very small space, and they hired me, and then I've been in capital markets pretty much, or related field, ever since.
So you go in, you're still at this point really young. You're in a room. Did you feel qualified to be there?
No, because I was used to doing something a certain way, and to see a much more scientific way of doing it, much more precise, was eye-opening. It was kind of like, wow, I made a sailboat, or I'm paddling around on this log in this lake, and then to see like a sailboat go by and think, wow, that's what I could be doing or should be doing. So that was an interesting feeling, seeing that. And so, yeah, it was a good experience.
How'd you learn? Was it just people around you?
Learning was tough. Paul Tuttle could be very difficult. And as the company grew, we would teach each other. But initially, it was kind of like Paul Tuttle expected me, even though I was paddling around on the log at First California Mortgage, he thought I knew how to sail a sailboat. And so when I came in, there was, the learning curve was pretty dramatic. And so as time went on, you learn more and more. But it was tough. And Paul kind of just, like I say, assumed that you knew something. And so you'd say he'd say, well, do this. And so he'd leave the room, and I'd go, Art, what do I do here? Or, whatever. Then as more people came in, they would look to me to be able to explain things. And so, you just grow into your job.
I do want to ask you, because you said secondary, you worked in secondary marketing, and then you mentioned it as capital markets. Do you remember when that shift happened where now it's, I still call it secondary.
I make jokes about secondary marketing versus capital markets, and people ask what the difference is. And back then, secondary marketing was, if you think about the primary market is dealing with borrowers. Primary market. Secondary market was taking that packaged loan and selling it to investors. capital markets came into it when the person running that got involved with dealing with warehouse banks, dealing with the agencies, dealing with investor approval, dealing with several things that the typical secondary marketing guy or gal wasn't dealing with. And so capital markets became an all-encompassing term probably around 2000 or something, 2005 back then, because there was a lot going on in the capital markets and you really had to pay attention. You couldn't just sit there and price loans and then lock loans, and that was the extent of your job. You had to do all these other things. So that was probably when capital markets crept into it.
And this is all, we mentioned we're in the 80s at this point. California in the 80s, if I remember correctly, recession was in the 80s, right? Wasn't there a pretty bad economy back then?
I have a real blind spot when it comes to recessions, expansions, and so on, because it always seemed like people wanted to buy homes. People don't necessarily need offices, they need homes. And so despite the interest rate climate, despite everything, you need a place to live. And so, sure, rates were going up and rates were going down. I remember the volatility in 1986, 87, there's some very volatile days. But through it all, you're trying to help borrowers, and recession, expansion, contraction, whatever was going on. I've never thought, 2004, that's when the Dow was at 1200, who knows? I never look at that. I tend to look at the current time and how borrowers can be helped by our industry, regardless of the economic climate.
So you're just going to head down. I know what my job is. I'm going to do my job. At this point, are you pooling loans yet? Or were you?
No, see, that was the interesting thing. At First California Mortgage, I was pooling loans. With Tuttle & Company, the clients were pooling loans. We were protecting their locked pipelines from fluctuations in interest rate.
Okay. So you grow through that. How long were you at Tuttle?
Many years. I left there in 1998 to be Mr. Mom. We moved to Europe. My wife worked for Hewlett-Packard, and they offered her an accounting project job in Edinburgh. And I was getting kind of burned out of, looking at looking at the mortgage-backed security market every day and dealing with the same issues and so forth. And I really wanted to spend more time with her and my kids, and I'd never been to Europe. And so I said, let's go. And so off we went.
What year was that?
1998.
Wow.
And then we were there for 9 months. Fantastic experience. Came back, and Paul had, the company was still going. It was fine. But I really didn't want to go back to that. And a friend of mine, a guy named Joe Garrett, had been enlisted or enrolled or brought on by the owner of a company to start a subprime company. This was all the rage. So,
and he's a Cal graduate.
He is.
Yeah.
In fact, he was buddies with my first boss. And that's how I got to know Joe. He had started the subprime company and said, hey, we need somebody to do capital market stuff. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure. Bay Area. And so I went to work there.
What company was that?
Well, it was called Standard Financial. It was out of Petaluma. And so that lasted until about 2000, actually not 2000, lasted for about 6 months or a year. And then an old client of mine, Crossland Mortgage out of Salt Lake City, owned by First Security Bank, they were saying, gosh, we've got all these branches. And wouldn't it be great if we could capture their subprime business? Hey, Rob, can you start a subprime company for us to capture, you can deal with brokers on your own, but you can also capture all the Crossland branches subprime business so we don't have to give that away. I said, sure. So we started that. And then in a short time, Wells Fargo came in and bought First Security Bank, which included Crossland, which included Standard Financial, and Wells Fargo had their own subprime company. And so we weren't needed. So then I went and biked around New Zealand for 3 weeks.
If you are watching this podcast and you're in the mortgage industry and you haven't checked out the Knowledge Coop, you definitely need to dive into the Knowledge Coop. In there, you will find content and community that will help you grow as an individual by learning everything there is to know about the mortgage industry. If you think you know everything, just dive in and take some classes because there's always something more you can learn. To be successful in this business, you've got to continually learn. In addition, if you're a company and you want to teach your people in your own environment, we've got that in the Knowledge Coop Enterprise Services. So reach out to us, check out knowledgecoop.com. Definitely join Coop Plus. Let's get back to the podcast. Wow.
So that was pretty cool. Just me in a little backpack.
So you overnight find out, I guess this isn't going to be, I mean, did you know that was about to happen or was it?
No, I remember, in any buyout process, as kind of the news, there's different channels of news that comes out. Official news, scuttlebutt, and then just pure rumor. And so there were a lot of rumors that, gee, Wells Fargo already had this subprime group. They don't need us. And so we saw the writing on the wall. It was all very amiable. Like, we got a severance and we have career counseling and went to career counseling. And I should have been a park ranger. And so, when I came back from New Zealand, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And at that point, I had a friend at CMG Mortgage who said, come work for us. We need somebody. So I went over there and did capital markets. And then I got worn out by the commute from San Rafael, Marin County, out to Walnut Creek. Actually, it wasn't Walnut Creek. It was down by Danville, San Ramon.
Yeah.
And so the guys at Tuttle & Company, which by then had changed their name to TRMS, said, hey, we need another account manager. I'm thinking, well, I did that already, but boy, it'd be nice to ride my bike to work every day. And not do that commute through the Bay Area. So I went back to TRMS. And then I didn't know you wanted my whole career history.
I'm fascinated by it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, it's not atypical because so many people in mortgage banking kind of do move around because we're friends, and then you go over to company XYZ, and so then you say, hey, we need this or what, so then I move. Anyway, I got hired by RPM Mortgage, Rob Hurt, in 2006 to do capital markets, and then in 2008, I was back to doing that commute because RPM was in Danville, or Alamo. And so I thought, oh man, this commute's killing me. Because what would happen in capital markets is you get there really early, like 5 or 5:30, and then you want to go home by 2. But no, hey Rob, we've got a management meeting at 3. Prepare this, that, and that for the management meeting at 3. And I've been there since 5 in the morning. And I'm like, oh God, this is tough. Plus, in 2008, as you might recall, things weren't great in mortgage banking. And I thought, gosh, what am I going to do here? And then my mom passed away in April of 2008, and I needed to take care of my dad, who lived another, 10 years, and see more of my kids and family and all that. And I was tired of doing that commute. And so in July, I said to Rob Hurt, I'll never forget it. We were crossing the street at the Western Secondary in San Francisco, and I said, "Hey, I need to focus on this. I can't focus as much as I can on capital markets for RPM." He goes, "We'll figure it out." And with Rob Hurt, if he doesn't want to hear something, he doesn't hear it. So he didn't hear it until October. So finally in October, like, Rob, I'm done. And we're still great friends. I mean, I've been to visit in Puerto Rico and Florida and so on. But so at that point, I quote, retired.
In 2008, the worst market we had
I was done.
In your history.
I was done.
Yeah.
I wanted to deal with my kids. They were getting older.
Right.
I was watching them age, and I'm sitting there doing the commute to RPM Mortgage out in Danville. And so I, quote, retired. But leading up to that, I was sending out this little daily commentary thing to, loan officers or account executives wherever I was, And so I, quote, retired from the day-to-day, but I kept sending the commentary out to people who had signed up to get it.
Mm-hmm. So when did you start? Do you remember your first email, or was it just kind of you blended into it?
It just blended. Yeah, it started probably in the late 1990s and then went into the 2000s and 2008. And I remember when I would send it out at RPM, sometimes they'd say, well, that's fine that Countrywide is doing this, but we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you put it in your newsletter? And I say, because Countrywide is allowing that. Well, you shouldn't put anything in your newsletter that we don't do.
Right.
So I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. But then when I retired, I just kept, I could put in whatever I want.
Right.
I could put in racy jokes. I could put in sarcastic comments. I could do anything I want. There were times when I'd say, the bond market didn't do anything yesterday, so I'm not going to waste your time.
That was the whole email?
Yeah.
Wow.
But now it's different.
Yeah.
Now unfortunately or fortunately, it's I can't really put in sometimes what I think in terms of sarcasm. I can't put in some really good jokes that I think are hilarious because, they're just not politically correct.
Well, and I want to talk about that a little bit because so you get out in 2008, you drop the mic, you walk away at the beginning of like the massive, foreclosures everywhere, everything's going wrong, but also at a time that everybody needs the news, like the right news, right? Mm-hmm. In 2008, we all were like, unbiased what is news. Happening? Unbiased. You had the implodometer that people were watching. I have friends that still remember what number they were on the implodometer, that they can tell you, like, we were number 67 or whatever. And they, and for those who don't know, the implodometer is this list. And basically, if you showed up on the implodometer, you were dead. Your company had shut down. And people found out from the implodometer that they didn't have a job anymore because it was getting so good that you would see it before you found out.
So I as those years went on, I would receive emails from, let's say, ABC Mortgage. Hey, Rob, can you change my email address from joeblow@abcmortgage.com to joeblow@hotmail.com? Mm-hmm. And I would get and that was my own informal implodometer, seeing email traffic coming to me saying, wow, I guess things aren't great at ABC Mortgage.
Right.
And so, interesting. But I would never use that in my commentary. I would just think it was interesting. But the flow of information is very interesting if you read books about the news. I always thought, and I still do, I always think that people are smarter than I am at what they do. Mm-hmm. I can give them the facts that will allow them to make decisions on their own. My job is not to cram my opinion down your throat. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of news sources now do that, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, I think that you're smarter than I am. I'm sending emails, I'm sending my commentary to loan officers who are infinitely better versed at dealing with borrowers. They may not know what's going on in capital markets, but I'm not going to tell them what to think about something. I'm going to say, here's what's going on with whatever, figure it out. Mm-hmm. And so I think that recipe has worked well for me because I do think I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room. I'm able to give people information and facts that allow them to help their clients or their borrowers. And I like doing that. Mm-hmm.
Do you, and by the way, I notice when you'll say some fact and then you'll say, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And I'm like, oh, but I'm thinking a lot about that because you won't go into that, the more opinion thing because you don't have to. Everybody's got an opinion on some of these things.
Everybody has an opinion. And I try to avoid work whenever possible.
Oh yeah,
I'm
me too.
Basically slothful. And so I used to just say, here's what's going on. And people would write and say, how do you know that? What's going on? Where can I find more information? Now I put in links to say, so I don't get emails asking about something.
Well, and you know how much I hate email. I can't imagine your job of replying to email. And I mean, we put something in about AI recently, and you got that feedback of like, oh, I tried that and it didn't work. And I'm like, well, you didn't do it right. And so you're not, I mean, I don't even like sending email because it's likely that I'll get an email back. Like that's how much I hate email. But you received this, and when you did it, you had retired. So you weren't held to any standards by any company, and you weren't making money off it. So you were just like
doing my thing. Yeah, exactly.
So did you, when people emailed you, because I imagine people emailed you like you said, and probably worse, like I can't believe you would say that, or do you just not care, or do those things still affect you?
No, they care. I cared then, I care now.
Yeah.
I try to put out a consistent product 6 days a week that people can rely on.
Yeah.
When it doesn't come out on time, namely because of constant contact, some glitch there, people write to me like within 10 or 15 minutes of when they usually get it. Hey, what's going on? Are you sick? Are you
my
whatever?
Gosh.
And so I've become this thing, whereas before I wasn't a thing, and now it is a thing, and there's pressure with that.
I was going to ask about
also
pressure. Yeah.
It can be rewarding, gratifying, but it's a labor of love. And I tell people I do it because I like doing it. When I stop liking it, I'll stop doing it.
Is that how you've kind of run? Like your history is, okay, this is pretty cool for now. And then you kind of move into something that like, hey, this could probably be pretty cool. And then I'll go to New Zealand for a while. And by the way, why New Zealand?
Well, New Zealand's pretty cool. Have you ever been?
No.
New Zealand is kind of like California in the 1950s. And I don't remember why. I'd been to Australia. I've been throughout the South Pacific. I've been different places. New Zealand seemed like a very bicyclist friendly environment. Great wine, friendly people, nice roads. And it was just an easy kind of thing. I think I'll take 3 weeks. It's not like I'm going to ride through Russia in 3 weeks.
Right.
Or ride through Australia in 3 weeks. New Zealand was much more bite-sizable in terms of that. And I'm very glad I did. I haven't been back. I may never go back to New Zealand because I've seen it. There's a lot of places in the world to see.
But you've made moves when you're like, this doesn't suit me or doesn't fit me anymore. You've been doing this a long time.
It's rare that I just get fed up.
Right.
There's a reason why I made that initial move from Safeway to the MBA program, not because I really didn't like Safeway. I think it's a great company. They like best product, I think, for milk and ice cream. But it was like, I need something more in my life. And then when Paul Tuttle sat next to me and then wanted to interview me, it wasn't like I was at First Cal looking for a job.
Yeah.
It was like I got offered
this. Could be really good for you.
And then when I left Tuttle and Company and I was a partner making decent money, it was because I wanted to see Europe, spend time with my kids. And then coming back, I'm like, I've got to support my family and so forth. And so the moves that I've made have been generally because people have reached out to me rather than me being unhappy or discontent about whatever it was I was doing.
This has been, you said since 2008 is really when that took off, right?
Yeah, this is
15
it's been,
years.
15 years, which arguably is the longest would be the longest I've worked doing any one thing. And like I said, I enjoy doing what I do. When I stop enjoying it, I'll stop doing it. But right now, and I tell people this, I have full transparency. Look, I get up at 4 a.m. I will have written as much as I can the day before. At 4 a.m. I get up, I check the markets, I finish, I put together the finished product, I get it out by 5:30 or 5:45, and then I'm pretty free for a while. So I can go for a bike ride, I can go for a hike, I can play tennis, I can go play basketball, I can do whatever it is that I want for some period of time, unless I have conference calls. But generally speaking, I have, and then I'll check in. People are surprised though when I travel with them how much I do work.
Oh my gosh.
It's not like, well, it's not like I spend half an hour. Hey Ron, how long does that commentary thing take? Like 20 minutes, half hour to put out every day? Like, no.
It's pretty constant.
It's more than that. And I think that because I've been so consistent, when I look back at, some people view me as a success. Gee, you get to play basketball, or you get to go for, whatever, or you make money in ads, and you've got, you go to a conference and people like, oh, there's Rob Chrisman kind of thing, which I very much appreciate. But I think that there's a lot that goes into it that people don't see. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, there's Steph Curry. Look, he made that, 40-foot shot. Well, because he practices those shots like for 8 hours a day. Uh-huh. I mean, you don't see how much, not that I'm Steph Curry, but you don't see what goes on behind the scenes.
Right.
You don't, like, your viewers here don't see the everything that's going on behind the scenes for this production or at the Coop. And so there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with the commentary.
Well, I'm gonna comment on that because I got to see it in Guatemala. So you threw your hand up and said, I want to go to Guatemala. You came down there with us. What I was impressed by is you did have the laptop out on the bus, and you were working, on the bus you were working. The second kids are in front of us, or the second we're in a village and we need to paint, which we did a spectacular paint job on that Hawaiian punch blue house. When it's time to paint, you were fully engaged. And so you're able to turn it off and turn it back on, where it felt like you've got no, I'm here and this is why I'm here time. And then you've got okay, and now I need to do work. It's that work hard, play hard mentality. You didn't, I didn't know what to expect with you down there because I know that you're working during the day doing it. But it was fun to watch because you were asking questions like on the bus that we would have all these conversations about what's happening in the market. Mm-hmm. I would see us the next day in the commentary.
Not
we
listed,
said that.
Not listed. Just like some vague thing. That's like people will say to me, oh, well, Rob, it's tough. Margins have gone down, but don't quote me on that. I'm like, dude, everybody knows margins have come down. I write about it every day. It's not that I'm not going to say John Smith said margins went down. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough but rewarding time when I have something else going on in my life besides the daily commentary.
But you don't stop.
I don't stop. The only time I have stopped, the only time in all these years was when I spent some time in Fiji in September with Rob and Kelly Kessel and some other folks who were on the boat. And so Rob had sold Compass Analytics to Black Knight, cashed out, bought a boat, and off he went. And he's like, hey, you guys want to come to Fiji? And I'm like, oh, yeah, cool. That sounds really neat. So I had my son Robbie do the commentary, and he did a great job. Mm-hmm. He did a great job. And so I every time I get on a plane, I think, well, if the plane crashes, Robbie can do this. Wow. If at some point I, bing, I tag the bell or whatever, and I'm done, I know that Robbie can do it.
Have there been times where you've contemplated quitting?
No.
Never?
No, because frankly, I don't know what I would do, and I do enjoy what I do. Mm-hmm. You enjoy what you do. It's evident.
Yeah.
And so I'm older than you, but, I don't want to, people say, well, when are you going to retire? I've got a pretty good life.
Yeah.
It's not like I tell people, it's not like we're paving asphalt in Mississippi in August. Mm-hmm. We're not getting worn out necessarily, but there will come a time, I think, that I just say, and usually it happens every day at 4 a.m. Because I'll wake up like at 3 or 3:30, and I'll lay there and I'll think, this, that, and the other thing. And then I'll just turn my alarm off, and then I'll stumble out of bed at 4 a.m. That's tough, and that's gotten harder over the years. But if I can take a nap at some point during the day, I'm okay.
Man, all right. How do you handle? I worked in the police department for 3 years, and when I was doing that, I was in college at DVC, actually, in criminal justice. And I remember one of the classes, they were talking about how do you get rid of the stuff that you wear all day. So you walk into your house, and how do you leave the stuff that happened in your daily job when you walk into your house? And I had a guy tell me, I touch a tree in my front yard, and I leave all my problems in the front yard, and then I go in and become a family man. And so I don't carry it in. In the hardest times of our business, which right now is one of them for sure, you have people all the time sending you messages, I'm sure, that are like, I don't know if we're going to make it. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if I should sell. I mean, you get all of these. How do you handle that without wearing it?
I don't handle it well.
You don't?
I don't do well with that. In fact, people will say, like my daughter, I was talking to her over the weekend. Dad, why are you in a bad mood? Well, here, blah, 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 blah. And what I tell people, it's like the Green Mile. Did you ever see the Green Mile?
Yeah.
John Coffey. At the end, he like opens his mouth and all the like bees or whatever flies out of his mouth. And it's all like the evil of the world. And he knows all this stuff and he stores it up. And he like, at the end, he just like, spits it all out. Well, people write to me all day long about, problems. And I help them to the extent that I can, but it can wear me down. And, I don't mind helping. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind. I like helping people. That's really, that's like why I send the commentary out, basically, because I think I'm helping people. But it can wear you down. And then you just have to, go play basketball or go play tennis or go, on a hike or go for a swim or something. And that helps me. But I don't like touch a tree and say, okay, now I can do this. It's, it can wear you down. And another thing is, I've had trouble drawing limits in terms of, I can be done with the commentary and all that by 6 a.m. But then I might be chimping away at 8 o'clock that night because some information has come over that I don't want to deal with at 4 in the morning the next day. I want to get it squared away because otherwise I'll be there at 2 a.m. thinking, man, I should have written this up. So it's, but the industry, I can't complain. There are many people in our industry who have it much worse than I have and have to deal with, you might be a loan officer, you have no loans in the pipeline. How are you going to support your family? You might be an underwriter who, every day you're thinking, am I going to get laid off because we don't have the volume. You could be the owner of a company saying, well, I've lost money every day every month for the last 6 months. How long do I want to do this? So there are people out there, keeping things in perspective, there are people out there who are much worse off than I am. And I try to think about that every day.
And do you turn that into perspective sharing when you go and write the commentary and try to encourage?
Yes. Yeah, well, I encourage is, once again, I just kind of put the facts out and I don't want to sugarcoat anything. And I'll I talk about it in the opening paragraph. I'll say, hey, rates are up, or here's what's going on. Because everybody knows rates are up and volumes are down and margins are doing this and so forth, and companies are shutting down or being bought and people being laid off and so on. They know that. But if I can, like in the opening paragraphs, put something interesting in about, Fat Bear Week or Cinco de Mayo as a joke every May 5th. People look forward to that Cinco de Mayo joke every May 5th. And so I try to put a interesting spin on things to some extent because it can be pretty dismal out there right now.
Do you have somebody you run your jokes by to find out if it's okay to put them in?
I don't.
So you've just tamed it over time.
I've tamed it, and when I go a little farther than I should, maybe I'll put a warning in there. Yeah. Hey, warning. Don't read this if you're going to be easily offended. There's a lot of humor out there that I can't put in my commentary because people will take offense.
Right.
And I think that humor is humor, and my sense of humor won't match yours, won't match somebody else's, but I put a joke out there and people will come up to me at conferences and say, hey, I send so many of your jokes on to my dad or my mom, or I share in the office or whatever, and I think that's great, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I can tell you, when I told the team here at the office you were coming in, they were like, the Rob Chrisman? And I know you hate hearing it, but you're one of the most humble guys I know, and it's just an honor that you're a friend, and it's been fun to watch the commentary and see how much you've changed this industry.
Now, you're going to Guatemala again in January.
Yeah.
And you have a big group of people?
We have 20 people this time.
20?
Yeah.
Are any left over from our Guatemala trip?
Derek Hill is coming with us. Hayden, of course, is coming with Sarah on our trip. Sarah Keller, she'll be with us.
It was all these guys.
Yeah, oh, that's right. We've opened it up. So we've become inclusive, and it's making for a really cool trip. So,
Good.
Yeah, good group of people. We just actually lost a guy that had gone to Guatemala on the trip before you. He passed away, mortgage guy. He passed away last week. And it's
Who's that?
Michael Erdman from Arizona.
Oh,
he was
wow.
has owned a couple companies, but I'll tell you, I was bawling my eyes out on the couch last night because you go through so much on that trip that I always tell people there's a moment I look for on those trips where I look at each person that goes and I try to find their moment when like they realize why they're there. And Michael was, we went to these disabled children in this wing of the state orphanage. And he was just holding
Yikes.
this girl. And I mean,
Right.
she was a disaster, and he picked her up and she wasn't. And he just sat there holding her for the longest time. And for him, that was like his moment where that's why he was there, is for that girl. And so I told that story yesterday on Facebook to his group, and his mom reached out and was affected by that. But
Yeah. Wow.
it's interesting when you go on trips like that, the bond you create with people, because you go through this stuff with people. And so I messaged our friends that were on that trip and let them know. But yeah, it's we'll keep doing it. We're back. This is our first one after 4 years of being off since COVID. And so we were there January 2020. And then that was our last trip. So this will be our first trip back. And next year, 2025, we will do it not on Shauna's birthday. Because every year I accidentally do it on Shauna's birthday. And you're like, you're killing me. I can't leave on my wife's birthday. So we'll make sure that we do it on a different day.
There you go.
Because we kind of need an interpreter.
Por supuesto.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Rob Chrisman. I appreciate you so much.
All right.